Well, good evening, everyone. This is Sue Hutchins with Iowa Prison Perspectives, yet again, to speak with you about a variety of different topics and a variety of different areas of concern about the prison system in Iowa. Most of you who have been here before already know what this program is about, but there may be some who are joining for the first time. And so let me tell you a little bit about what I'm doing here. This is a collaboration between Iowa Cure, Living Beyond the Bars of Iowa, and the Iowa Justice Action Network. The purpose of these interviews and this particular YouTube channel is to inform you, the public, about the Iowa prison system, about what goes on, about the things that are going well in the prison system, as well as the things that we feel need to be addressed and possibly reformed and changed. So far, I have done 18 or 19 interviews. I believe it's 19 interviews. And we have had about 1,800 to 2,000 people visit and watch these interviews, which I am very pleased about. The intent of this was for you, the public, and with the hope that I would hear from you about what you think about prison, about what you think about the different topics that we're covering here, and what you think and feel about any experience that you might have had in the prison system or with the prison system. Additionally, I was hoping for some suggestions about what you would like to hear about. I was looking for and hoping for some comments about what is useful to you, what you have learned, what may be new information for you. And it's been very nice to get some responses in those areas. What my intentional format was initially is to interview people who have been incarcerated, people who love someone who's incarcerated or has been incarcerated, people who have worked for the Department of Corrections, and people like myself who are advocates and who are interested in making some needed changes in the prison system, looking at the prison system as a whole, looking at rehabilitation, looking at the purpose of prison, and looking at what needs to be done in terms of reentry for people who are getting out of prison, so that we could be more humane and more proactive in our approach to the prison, to incarcerating people, not only in Iowa, but in the United States, but specifically in Iowa. I took some notes. This is going to be a recap. Tonight I'm going to do a recap of what has been covered so far. And then I'm going to talk for a few minutes about what my intent is to add, in addition to what I've been doing, what I intend to add in the future as far as interviews are concerned. So far, I have interviewed 4 family members, loved ones, who have someone who's incarcerated, 4 incarcerated people, 3 people who have been employed by the Department of Corrections at one time or another, and 5 advocates, including myself, for the prison system. Actually, let me correct that. I've interviewed 6 people who have been incarcerated in the prison system. Not 4, but 6 people who've been incarcerated. And I want to go over what, not in detail, but sort of an overview of what each of these people has shared with you. And I would encourage you, if you haven't watched the interviews, to watch them so that you get these people's from their own mouth and their own mind about what they're saying, so that you don't just take my word for it. And I also would encourage you to comment. I would really like to hear from you and hear comments. The first 2 interviews that I did were with Larry and Nancy. Larry talked specifically about the air conditioning issues at Anamosa Reformatory Prison and at Mount Pleasant Prison. Those are the 2 prison systems in Iowa that do not have air conditioning. And also at Anamosa, there is a serious problem with black mold. Both of those are, in my opinion, and in our opinion, health hazards, as well as I would consider, given the heat problem in Iowa and given the humidity problem in Iowa, they are also, in addition to being health hazards, they are also rather inhumane treatment of people, dangerously. Nancy spoke about what it's like to have a family member incarcerated for a long period of time and the strain that that is on a family, the strain that that is financially as well as emotionally on a family. Melissa is also a family member, and she spoke about what it is like to have a fiance who's incarcerated and who's doing a life sentence, the financial strain on the family, the emotional difficulties, and some of the lack of attention that a person gets if they're not a blood relative or married to someone who's incarcerated. Jerry Bartroff was interviewed. He's the past director of the Department of Corrections, and he talked about pre-COVID treatment because that's when he was the director, was the pre before COVID ever came into being in prison. He talked about some of the programs that existed pre-COVID, and he talked about his views of being progressive, the things that he felt like would be of benefit for helping people be rehabilitated and be better citizens once they were released from prison. Tim Deesberg and Tammy Deesberg were interviewed. Tim talked specifically about the programs that he designed. He was the person in Iowa who designed the apprenticeship programs, which were wonderful programs for people, and how he was able to do that on a large scale through Iowa prison industries, and how many people that actually helped, so that when they left prison, they were journeymen and they had many opportunities for a really good career, not just a job, but a really good career. He also was part of writing some legislation for commutation and talked about the change that he saw in a lot of the lifers during the 30 years that he worked in the prison system, the rehabilitation that he personally experienced by working with the lifers in the prison system. Tammy worked for Iowa Prison Industries and talked about that. It mostly talked about her and Tim together. They're married, and her and Tim together have done quite a bit to help the juvenile lifers who have been released from prison, help them get jobs, help them get their driver's license, even have helped them find housing, and have been a great support. Talked about the necessity for people to be supportive of folks who are coming out of in prison, and the kinds of things that people need when they're released from prison. Michelle, who is the director of Inside Out in Iowa City, runs a reentry community, and she's the director. And she talked about the need for support, the need for groups, and the need for individual help and counseling for people who are coming out of prison, and the difference that that makes in people's lives. Donald was one of the first people that I interviewed that had been incarcerated and is now out, and he talked about the way to become successful as a returned citizen, about the need for motivation and the need for support and the need to stay on the straight and narrow, so to speak. I mean, that's what we would call it, the straight and narrow, once you are released from prison, and how important it is to be motivated and to have some kind of a plan that you have support for. Corey was interviewed. He had been incarcerated and is now living in the Cedar Rapids area. And he talked about some of the conditions in prison that are in need of change. He talked about reentry and the some of the difficulty roadblocks that people face when they get out of prison and they don't have a support system intact for when they get out. The need for that, the need for clothing, the need for a way to get a driver's license, the need for a way to open a bank account, the need for some of the difficulties that people have when they are newly released in getting to the appointments that they need to get to, in meeting the expectations that they need to make and needing to meet the expectations that they are to make. um, Mary Cohen, who is a professor at the University of Iowa, professor of music at the University of Iowa, ran a choir at the correctional facility in Coralville, which used to be called Coralville Correction Facility, and it is now called Iowa IMCC, Iowa Medical and Classification Center. She led the choir there for a number of years and was able to take people out here who were interested in going inside the prison to sing with the people who were incarcerated, and the value of music and of art for people who are incarcerated in order to express themselves and to gain some spirituality and some self-esteem and to be part of something. The real big need for people who are incarcerated to feel a part of something. She's also written a book about the need for music, the value of music, and the need for that sort of outlet for people who are incarcerated. Dan Akers has been in both state prison and federal prison, and he talked about the differences between the two, about the experiences that he had in federal prison and the experiences that he had in state prison, and talked about the need for rehabilitation and job training and ways to actually become successful once you're released from prison. Al Hayes, who is the co-chair of the Iowa Justice Action Network, talked about mass incarceration, gave us a good overview of mass incarceration and the problems that it has caused. The overwhelming disproportionality of African American people who are incarcerated, minorities who are incarcerated, and about the treatment in the judicial system of people of color. Alex Alexandria from the Sentencing Project gave us an overview of life without the possibility of parole in not only in Iowa, but in the country, and gave us the information that life does not mean life in every state, but in Iowa, life means life. In a lot of states, life means 35 years to life, but there's the possibility of parole. That is not true in Iowa. Life means life in Iowa, natural life. And talked about mass incarceration in general countrywide. Wendy, who is the president of CURE, Iowa CURE, talked about advocacy and about what we can do out here as advocates, what kind of a part we can actually play out here as advocates, and the need for people to advocate for people who are in prison and for change in the prison system and for health concerns as well as mental health concerns, physical health concerns as well as mental health concerns. Dell talked about his lengthy incarceration and what he's doing now as a PhD student at the University of Iowa, and what his plan for the future is in terms of wanting to be helpful in making reform in the prison system, which was very, very valuable. And there's one more person whose name escapes me at this particular moment. Talked about how charges were piled on for him, how he ended up doing 27 years because the charges were run concurrently rather than, or were run rather than consecutively, and the damage that that did to him and his family and the time that he lost. He also talked about how he got caught in the trap of being with someone who said she was 17 when she was actually 14, and how in Iowa that does not matter. The fact that she lied and turned out to be 14 years old is not defendable in Iowa once their charges are filed. Even though she admitted she had lied about her age, he was still charged. The fact that she told him she was older than she was did not make any difference at all in his charges and in the amount of time that he was sentenced to. So that is an overview of the people that I have interviewed thus far and what we have learned from them. Also, one other person, the public defender, Mr. Hallbecker, from Waterloo, Cedar Falls area. He is the chief public defender, and he talked about prosecutorial discretion and the way that people can have crimes. He does not call them stacked, but I call them stacked. I mean, that's my own personal terminology for that. How a prosecutor has the ability to add on charges in order to either get people to accept a plea or in order to get them charged with more so that they end up doing more time in prison. He also let us know that prosecutors don't have to prosecute any case, that they have the discretion of what they will prosecute, who they will prosecute, and how the charges will read as far as prosecution is concerned, which I think is very important for the public to know, because a lot of people think that that prosecutors do not have that discretion. They don't understand that prosecutors actually have the discretion of what the charges will be and what the amount of time that a person will end up doing based on the charges. He also talked about how difficult it can be to be a public defender because the public defenders do not have much they don't have very much resources at their command, whereas the district attorney or the county attorneys in Iowa, as they're called, have detectives, have the police, have a variety of different resources that put the case together for them. Public defenders don't have that luxury. And that all you're really promised is a defense. You're not necessarily promised a good defense or a fair defense. You're promised a defense. So public defenders have a very large burden in the country, not just in Iowa, but in the country. And I think that that's important information for all of us to know when we're thinking about people who are charged and who are going to court and whose lives are on the line. So that's what we've covered so far in these interviews, and I must say that I'm happy. I'm very pleased about and very grateful for the people who have been willing to be interviewed. I'm also very grateful for the response, and I feel really privileged to be able to do this channel to help inform the public. In looking at what I think needs to be added, and in looking at comments that I got and suggestions that I've gotten, which I'm very grateful for, one of the things, in addition to what I'm already doing, which is the 4 that I have named earlier: people who've been incarcerated, people who love someone incarcerated, people who worked for the Department of Corrections, and people who are advocates in one form or another. In addition to continuing to interview those people in those populations, I'm going to add mental health issues and concerns, because I think that's really important to add mental health concerns. I think it's time to expand to that. I also think it's time to be talking to people from other states who have been released from a life sentence, because we don't have that option in Iowa because the commutation process, there hasn't been anybody commuted in Iowa for 35, it's going on 40 years now. Governor Branstad nor Governor Reynolds have seen fit to commute anybody's sentence. And so life has meant, literally has meant life, even though there is a provision for lifers to have their sentence committed to a number of years so that they could possibly be looked at by the parole board and possibly be paroled. That has not happened in Iowa. I think it would be helpful for you, the public, to hear from some people who did have a life sentence for a Class A felony, which would be murder, accessory to murder, or kidnapping, to hear from folks who did have those sentences and who have been rehabilitated and who are very, very constructive citizens in their world today. So I'm going to include people from different states who have served very long sentences, 35, 40 years, so one guy 50 years, and who have been released. I think that's important. I'm also going to include what some of the surrounding states that are Republican states, some of our surrounding Midwestern states, are doing as far as the prison is concerned for their people. Things that are similar to Iowa, and some things that are very different than the way Iowa does things. Some things are more about rehabilitation. Some things are less about rehabilitation. Um, I just think it makes some sense to look at the surrounding states, our bordering states and surrounding states. And the reason that I say that is because legislators, whenever I talk to legislators about making change in Iowa, making change in sentencing, raising the age to 21, the commutation process, blah, 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 legislators always say, well, what is Nebraska doing? What is Minnesota doing? What is Illinois doing? What is Missouri doing? Missouri happens to be a Republican state. Illinois happens to be run by Democrats. So there's interest in what other states are doing around us that border us. Legislators are not at all interested. I mean, I can't say that. That's not true. That's unfair. Legislators do not listen so much to what states that are beyond our borders are doing. They're more interested in the heartland. And because the values of the heartland are similar to Iowa, they're not particularly interested in what California is doing. They're not particularly interested in what New York is doing or Maryland is doing, or those states. I mean, there's some interest, but they're much more interested in what people who live in the heartland and those states are doing. So I'm going to start including some people who are from other states and have been released from very lengthy sentences or life sentences for heinous crimes, how they're doing, and what their experience has been like. I'm also going to focus more on the barriers and the difficulties that people experience during reentry. I think I think we need to know more about how we can be helpful and more about how we are harmful as a society to folks who are coming out of a very who are coming out and who are institutionalized. I'm also going to do a specific, I don't know if it'll be an interview or if it'll be me talking to you. I don't know yet, but about institutionalization, what institutionalization actually is, how it happens, and how it is very traumatic when you come out of an institution into the free world, the adjustment period is pretty traumatic for people. In fact, there is a title for that. We talk about post-traumatic stress disorder for people who have undergone severe trauma. What we talk about for incarcerated people and what is named now and being considered for the DSM as far as diagnostic mental health definitions is called post-incarceration syndrome. And it's a real thing. So I'm going to be either talking about that myself or seeing if I can't find a mental health professional that is willing to discuss that with me, be interviewed about that, and pass that information on to you. So that's the future. Um, Please keep listening and please keep commenting and please contact me at Iowa Prison Perspectives at gmail.com. That's IA Prison Perspectives at gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. I really am doing this for your benefit and for the benefit of the families who have someone who they love that is incarcerated, as well as for the people who are incarcerated and who are going to be returning to society and will be all of our neighbors at some point and have children who need a parent, who need them as a parent. What we can do as a society to be more helpful and less harmful in terms of reentry and in terms of rehabilitation and in terms of the way that we treat people while they are incarcerated. So once again, I thank you very much for joining and look forward to hearing from you. So please contact me and I will see you again very soon. Good night for now.